President Donald Trump unveiled a political bombshell, exposing a multi-million-dollar fraud tied to Judge James Boasberg and his brother. What followed was a shocking twist. Both brothers were handcuffed and prepared for deportation. The video revealed exclusive behind-the-scenes visuals and details on what Trump discovered and how this unprecedented move shook the legal establishment. It was a cold Monday morning at the White House. President Donald Trump, now in his second term as the 47th president, sat silently in the Oval Office staring at a thick manila envelope. It had no return address, just 3 typed words on the front. Read immediately. Urgent. Trump's instincts, sharpened by decades of political betrayal and deception, told him this was serious. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside were 12 pages of financial records, internal memos, and 2 grainy photos. What he saw made his chest tighten. Judge James Boasberg, chief judge of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, was at the center of it all. The document suggested that not only had Boasberg covered up a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme involving government contracts, but his own brother, a high-ranking contractor, had funneled millions through shell companies. Trump didn't speak. He simply stared. "Get me Pam Bondi," he said quietly, his voice like thunder on a calm day. No one in the room moved. They had seen that look before. America was about to be shaken to its core. By Tuesday morning, former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi arrived at the White House, her hair pulled back, a thick file under her arm. "This," she said, pointing to a page in the documents, "isn't just fraud. It's treason." Trump leaned in. Bondi revealed that Judge Boasberg's brother, David Boasberg, had won over $40 million in federal cybersecurity contracts without public bidding. The company, registered under another name, was traced back to a Caribbean bank account tied to both brothers. Worse yet, national security data might have been exposed in the process. "Sir," she whispered, "the judge ruled on surveillance programs that protected these contracts. He silenced whistleblowers. This wasn't just about money. This was about controlling what we see and what we don't." Trump's jaw tightened. "I want the full truth." Quietly, no leaks. Outside the Oval Office, Secret Service agents discreetly reviewed Boasberg's travel records. In the shadows, America's legal system was unraveling. But no one knew yet. By Wednesday morning, Trump and Bondi were escorted to an underground room below the Eisenhower Executive Office building. It was a secure, sensitive, compartmented information facility, SIF. Waiting inside were 2 former NSA analysts. One of them, Rachel Linwood, looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I used to work under Judge Boasberg's National Security Court," she said, trembling. "I begged them to listen. They shut me out." On the screen behind her, files flickered. Emails, bank transfers, video clips. One showed Judge Boasberg speaking with his brother outside a building labeled Kessler Defense Solutions. It was one of the shell firms used to filter the fraud. Rachel played a final clip. Audio. Judge Boasberg. "Once the final contract is signed, no one will question where the money went, especially not under a Biden court." Trump stood up, his hands balled into fists. "I'm not Biden," he said, "and this time, they picked the wrong man to fool." As Rachel wiped her tears, Bondi whispered, "Sir, if this gets out, we're not just dealing with a scandal, we're dealing with history, and history was about to be made." It was now late Wednesday afternoon when Rachel Linwood, the former NSA analyst, reached into her coat pocket and placed a small photograph on the table. The photo showed a little girl with bright blue eyes and a feeding tube in her nose. "My daughter Emily," Rachel whispered. "Boasberg's silence cost her everything." The room froze. Rachel had discovered the fraud years ago. She tried to warn her superiors, but after she testified anonymously in a classified memo, her access was revoked. Shortly after, her health care benefits were mysteriously canceled. Her daughter's cancer treatment was denied. The judge, she believed, would protect Justice Judge James Boasberg, had allegedly buried her complaint. Trump's voice was low. "You're saying this was more than money?" Rachel nodded. "This was punishment for speaking out." Pam Bondi wiped her eyes. The silence was painful. Trump looked at Emily's photo and said, "No American should suffer because someone in power wants to play God." He stood up. "Get me a federal marshal. It's time we knock on some doors." By midnight, black SUVs crept through the quiet streets of Washington, D.C., tires humming softly under yellow streetlights. Federal agents surrounded Judge Boasberg's home. Inside, James was still awake, sipping tea, reviewing documents. He had no idea what was coming. His brother David was in the guest room, scrolling through emails, some of them linked to offshore payments. When the doorbell rang, James opened it casually. What he saw drained the color from his face. 3 U.S. Marshals, 2 FBI agents, and a grim-faced DOJ official, Judge James Boasberg, the lead marshal said, "Under presidential authority, you are ordered to surrender your devices and remain on premises pending investigation." Behind him, David appeared, confused. "Wait, what is this?" he asked. They were read their rights. James didn't speak. David panicked. Through the back window, one agent noticed boxes, dozens of them, stacked neatly, labeled financials. President Trump, monitoring from a secure room, said only one word when he saw the feed. "Freeze them. Every asset, every passport, every plane ticket." The Boasberg brothers' world was beginning to collapse. Thursday morning came heavy with silence. The Boasberg brothers were placed in separate rooms inside a federal holding facility, not a prison yet, but secure, locked, and guarded. James asked to speak with only one person, President Donald Trump. That same day, in a private high-security room, the former judge met with the president. James's eyes were red, hands shaking. "I didn't start it," he whispered. "It was David. I tried to stop him, but I was afraid." Trump looked him in the eye. "Afraid of what?" James broke down, sobbing into his palms. "They threatened to hurt Rachel's daughter if I didn't stay quiet. I signed off on rulings I never believed in. I buried evidence. I watched families suffer. I hated myself every day." For a moment, Trump said nothing. Then, slowly, he slid a photo across the table. "Emily's photo, she's alive," Trump said softly. "But she still needs treatment. Tell me everything and I'll make sure she gets it." That moment shattered the judge. He nodded. "I'll give you everything." The system had bent him, but now he would help destroy it. While agents secured more evidence, from the Boasberg home, one detail caught an agent's eye. A strange ticking sound behind the fireplace mantel. Inside an old wooden clock hidden behind the gears, they discovered a folded letter. It was handwritten, dated 3 years earlier. The name at the top made the agent freeze. It was written by Judge Boasberg himself. In it, he confessed that he had been pressured into ruling in favor of certain defense contractors. He named 3 high-level DOJ officials and claimed he was forced into silence after David was approached by foreign intermediaries with ties to Panama and Dubai. The letter was never sent. The clock had hidden it, maybe on purpose, maybe out of fear. When President Trump read the letter that afternoon, his jaw clenched. "It's bigger than we thought," he whispered to Bondi. "He tried to do the right thing, and they buried him." Pam's eyes welled up. "Sir, what if there are more judges? Like him?" Trump didn't answer. He was already dialing a number. "Call in the Inspector General. We're opening the vault." Thursday night turned into early Friday morning. Beneath a government building near Foggy Bottom, a steel vault was opened for the first time in years. Few knew it existed. Fewer had access. But Trump had ordered it opened under emergency executive authority. Inside were files dating back 2 decades, sealed whistleblower reports, unreleased testimonies, audio tapes. Some were marked, classified, do not review without chief judge approval. And there, on the second shelf, were 2 files, Linwood, Rachel, and Boasberg, James. Rachel's file confirmed her report had been buried. Notes from DOJ officials read, "Potential risk to contractor stability. Recommend suppression." Boasberg's file showed surveillance footage from years earlier. It captured him crying in his office, whispering, "I can't keep doing this." Trump didn't blink. This vault, it's a cemetery of the truth. One folder had a strange stamp, Project Tether, the same name David Boasberg had used in his company's IQ emails. Pam opened it slowly. It wasn't just contracts. It was a plan to wire sensitive U.S. military communication systems to private servers overseas. God help us, she whispered. Trump looked straight ahead. Now the world knows why I had to wait. Come back. Rachel Linwood had stayed in a private hotel since speaking with Trump. She was under 24-hour protection, but her hands still shook each time she reached for the phone. That night, she recorded a video. Not for the public, not for the courts, just for her daughter. "Hi, sweetie," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "One day when you're old enough to understand, I want you to know why Mommy risked everything." She paused, wiping her tears with a trembling hand. "They told me to stay quiet. They said no one would believe me, but I did it anyway. Because I love you, and because I believe in this country." She took a breath. "You are the reason I kept fighting. Even when they took our home. Even when they told me you couldn't get treatment." Rachel turned the camera off. She handed the phone to a federal agent and said, "Give it to the president. He'll know what to do." That video would later break every heart in the room, including Trump's. He watched it in silence, standing alone. Then he said to himself, "She gave everything. Now it's my turn to give it back." Friday morning, the White House phone rang. Not a public line, but a secure one known only to a few top-level insiders. President Trump answered it personally. "This is General Harper from U.S. Cyber Command," the voice said, calm but urgent. "Sir, the servers linked to David Boasberg's shell companies. Some of them route through Germany, and one of them, it's pinging from Beijing." Trump's eyes narrowed. The implications were chilling. Military communications, defense technologies, and classified satellite data could have been slipping through private hands into foreign governments. Pam Bondi stepped in, listening carefully. "That's espionage, Mr. President." Trump paused. "No, that's betrayal." He immediately summoned Rachel Linwood back to the White House, this time for a formal interview with the National Security Council. As she stepped into the room, visibly shaken, Trump gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "You were right," he said softly. "And now we're going to fix it." Rachel sat down, her voice trembling but strong. "Then I'll tell you everything," she said. "Even the part I never told anyone. And what she shared next would change the course of American history forever." "There's a tunnel," she said, "under a building near DuPont Circle. I only saw it once. David took me there. Said it was part of a forgotten Cold War shelter, but I think it was a private data center." President Trump's jaw clenched. "And what was stored down there?" Rachel swallowed hard. "Servers, dozens, no markings, no security cameras. He called it the backbone. He said that if anything ever came crashing down, everything they needed to rebuild their control was stored there." Trump didn't wait. By Friday afternoon, military intelligence and cyber units were dispatched to the site Rachel described. And she was right. Beneath a cracked sidewalk in the shadow of an old brick building, they found a rusted steel hatch. It led down into a concrete bunker filled with humming servers and dusty metal racks. "What was on those servers?" Pam Bondi asked, scrolling through one file. Her face went pale. Judge Boasberg had approved fake warrants for surveillance on journalists, politicians, even grieving military families. Rachel looked down, holding back tears. "I told him it was wrong," Trump gently whispered, "and now the whole world will know you did." As Friday evening fell, the American people still had no idea what was brewing beneath their feet. But inside a quiet federal courthouse in downtown D.C., a moment no one thought possible was unfolding. Judge James Boasberg and his brother David were brought into a private chamber surrounded by federal marshals. They weren't allowed to speak to each other. Trump had made a decision, one he didn't take lightly. "We are not above the law," he said in a quiet meeting with his senior staff, "and neither are they." The door opened. A marshal read the charges. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, abuse of judicial authority, endangerment of national security. Then came the moment no one ever expected, the sound of handcuffs clicking, not for revenge, but for justice. David shouted, "You'll regret this." James said nothing. He only looked at Rachel Linwood, who stood quietly in the hallway with her daughter's photo clutched in hand. Their eyes met, and for the first time, the judge who once sat on the highest bench in America lowered his head because justice had finally spoken. Friday night, just after the handcuffs clicked, the room emptied slowly. Only President Trump, Pam Bondi, and a silent Judge Boasberg remained behind the thick glass of the courthouse hallway. Boasberg sat hunched on the bench, his suit wrinkled, his dignity slowly slipping through his fingers. "I wore the robe to protect the law," he muttered, tears filling his eyes. "But I let fear dictate my justice." Trump didn't respond right away. He stared at the man who had once signed rulings that impacted millions, now too broken to lift his head. "You had a choice," Trump finally said. "You could have spoken up." Boasberg whispered, "They threatened my son too. I didn't know what else to do." The mention of his son shifted everything. Pam Bondi blinked in surprise. That detail wasn't in the files. Trump narrowed his eyes. "Where is your son now?" Boasberg looked up slowly. "He's missing. Has been for 6 days. A cold silence followed. Pam whispered, "Sir, this might not be over." Trump looked at the guards. "Day, the transport. We need to find that boy." What started as fraud was now becoming something deeper. A family torn apart by corruption and silence. That same night, inside a secure federal room, Boasberg sat across from President Trump once more, but this time as a father. "My son Jacob. He's 17, he said. The day I got the first offshore payment, he found out. He didn't want the money. He hated it. He looked up with red eyes. He left a note saying, 'If this is who you are, I don't want to be part of it.' He hasn't come home." Since Trump stood silently for a long moment. This was no longer about power or politics. It was about a boy, a son who disappeared because he couldn't live with his father's shame. Pam Bondi checked local hospitals. Rachel Linwood called in tech support to trace the boy's phone. It had pinged last just 4 blocks from Rachel's old apartment. The pieces were connecting. Trump's voice was low. "If your son is still alive, we will find him. But if he's hurt, that's on you." Boasberg broke. Years of silence shattered as he wept, openly. "I just want to tell him I'm sorry. I want to be his father again, not a judge." Trump nodded, his eyes firm but filled with empathy. "Then help us bring him home." Saturday morning began with pouring rain. Federal agents searched an abandoned row of buildings near Rachel Linwood's old neighborhood. It was a rundown area. She had once been forced to live in after losing everything. It made sense Jacob would go there. Somewhere far from wealth, far from shame. Just as the agents were about to leave, one building, a soft sound echoed from the basement. A cough. They rushed in. Through the mold and shadows, they saw a figure, curled in the corner. It was Jacob Boasberg, pale, thin, freezing, but alive. He didn't fight when they helped him up. He just whispered, "Is my mom okay? Did my dad finally tell the truth?" Back at the facility, when Judge Boasberg saw his son walk through the door, alive but bruised by days alone, he fell to his knees. Jacob didn't say anything. He just walked forward and placed a single wet glove on the table. "I saw everything. Dad, I saw the files. I saw the people you hurt. And now I saw what you did." Boasberg cried like a child. Trump quietly left the room. He didn't need to say a word. Sometimes justice looks like a reunion. After Jacob's rescue, he was immediately taken to Walter Reed Hospital for observation. President Trump visited the room personally, stepping in quietly while Jacob was asleep. Rain still tapped gently against the window pane. Trump looked around. No cameras, no reporters, just a boy who had been lost in a storm caused by the adults who should have protected him. Rachel Linwood stood in the hallway, watching silently. She knew what it meant for the president to show up like this, not as a politician, but as a human being. Pam Bondi joined him at the bedside. "He's stable," she said softly. "But emotionally, he's been carrying his father's guilt for years." Trump didn't say much. He simply reached into his coat and placed something beside Jacob's pillow. A handwritten letter. It said, "You didn't run away, Jacob. You ran toward truth. That takes more strength than most men ever find." President Donald J. Trump. As they left the room, Rachel wiped her eyes. "He reminded me what a real leader looks like," she whispered. And for the first time in days, a tiny light returned to the darkest corner of this week-long storm. Saturday evening, just as calm began. To return, another twist arrived. A knock at the White House security gate. It was Senator Howard Carlisle, a long-serving Democrat with a powerful voice in judicial oversight. Trump's advisors were hesitant, but the president allowed him in. Inside the Roosevelt Room, Senator Carlisle leaned in and spoke quietly. "I knew James Boasberg for 30 years. We didn't always agree, but if he turned, I need to know who else has." Trump folded his arms. "You came here to ask questions, Senator," he said calmly. "Or to cover for someone else?" Carlisle looked tired, older than his years. "I came to offer names," he said, "and to tell you I think there's still a way to fix this without destroying the last thread of trust Americans have left in our courts." Trump raised an eyebrow. "You came here to ask questions, Senator," he said calmly. "Or to cover for someone else?" Carlisle slid a list across the table. 7 names, all judges, all confirmed under previous administrations, all suspected of connections to the same offshore network as the Boasbergs. "You do the right thing with this, and you'll save more than a presidency. You'll save the system itself." Trump looked down at the paper and nodded slowly. "Then let's save it." While the world watched the headlines unfold, one small moment quietly changed everything. Inside a sealed evidence bag found in David Boasberg's belongings was a handwritten letter. It wasn't addressed to a government official or business partner. It was addressed to his mother. Pam Bondi read it first, then she passed it to Trump. "Dear Mom, I never told you how far this went. You always said justice matters more than money. I failed you. James tried to stop it, but I pulled him deeper. I thought I was building a future for our family. Instead, I built a grave. If this reaches you, I'm sorry. I don't know what happens next, but please don't let Jacob grow up believing we were monsters. I loved you both. I just lost my way. David." The room fell silent. Pam whispered, "Sometimes even monsters write love letters." Trump placed the note beside Jacob's hospital photo. He knew what came next wasn't about punishment. It was about truth, healing, and redemption. And in that moment, America didn't just see a scandal unravel. They saw a president fight to put broken lives back together. As dawn broke on Sunday morning, Trump met again with his cybersecurity team. They had traced the final server connections from the tunnel under DuPont Circle, and what they found next froze the room. One offshore account tied to the fraudulent payments bore a signature. Not David Boasberg's, not James's. It was a name no one expected: Judge Harold Myers, a longtime federal judge who had mentored Boasberg in his early career. Pam Bondi slammed the report on the table. "Harold retired 10 years ago, but this proves he never really left." Rachel Linwood leaned in, visibly shaken. If Myers was the architect, then James and David were just the middlemen. Trump's jaw tightened. So he buried them under his orders, then disappeared. Just then a call came through. One of Trump's agents had found Myers. He was living quietly in a lakeside estate in Vermont, off the grid, under a false name. Trump stood, his voice steady. "Get me a chopper. If he started this, I'll finish it." Justice wasn't done yet. The man who trained the judge behind the scandal was about to face the truth himself. The chopper hovered over a quiet Vermont lake by late Sunday afternoon. Trees swayed gently, birds scattered. It was a peaceful scene. Too peaceful for what was coming. Trump stepped out with Secret Service, and Pam Bondi behind him. At the edge of a cabin deck stood Harold Myers, white beard, cane in hand, staring at the water like he'd been waiting. "You finally came," he said without turning. Trump approached. "You left your fingerprints in the code." Myers sighed. "I didn't. Think you'd trace it. Not this fast." Pam Bondi stepped forward. "You masterminded a system that poisoned the courts, silenced good people, and used children's health care as leverage." Myers finally turned. His eyes weren't fearful. They were tired. "I wanted to build a firewall against chaos, against foreign interference. But then the money came, and once it did, we couldn't stop." He pulled a folder from his coat. "These are the names of everyone I worked with. Some are still sitting judges. Some are politicians. If I go down, they go too." Trump took the folder, his eyes never leaving the old man. "You don't decide how this ends. The people do." And for the first time, Myers nodded. "Then let it end the right way." Sunday night, President Trump returned to the White House, folder in hand. He walked directly to the press briefing room. No script, no teleprompter, just a man facing a nation that needed the truth. "My fellow Americans," he began, his voice steady. "This week, we uncovered something darker than fraud. We uncovered betrayal. At the heart of our justice system." He spoke of Judge Boasberg, David, Rachel Linwood, the hidden servers, and now Harold Myers, the ghost behind the curtain. But through it all, Trump said, "We've seen bravery too. A young boy who ran from lies, a mother who stood up when no one else would, and a truth that refused to stay buried." The room was silent. Pam Bondi stepped beside him, holding the folder. "These names," Trump continued, "will be reviewed and investigated one by one. There will be justice, but not vengeance. That's not who we are." Rachel Linwood, watching from home, broke down in tears. Jacob, in his hospital bed, whispered, "He kept his word." And across the country, millions watched, not with anger but with hope, because for the first time in a long time, they saw a president put truth before power and people before politics. Monday morning arrived like a storm about to break. Judge James Boasberg and his brother David were quietly transferred to a secure, federal courtroom under heavy guard. No press, no spectators, just Trump's special task force, the Department of Justice, and a single camera recording everything for future public release. The courtroom was quiet, heavy not with fear, but with truth. David kept his eyes low. James clutched a handkerchief, trembling. Then something unexpected happened. Jacob entered the courtroom. Everyone turned. He stood tall, still recovering, still healing but firm. "I asked to speak," Jacob said softly. Judge and DOJ alike allowed it. Jacob looked directly at his father. "You taught me justice. You just forgot how to follow it." Then he turned to Trump. "Thank you, Mr. President, for helping my father remember who he used to be." Tears fell down James's face. Even the court recorder paused, wiping her glasses. The gavel echoed once. No final ruling, not yet. But something had been decided. America saw what accountability looked like. And it didn't wear chains. It wore courage. President Trump returned to the White House as the weight of the week pressed, harder than ever. He knew the legal process had only begun, but in the eyes of the people, a battle for justice had already been won. That afternoon he sat down with Rachel Linwood, this time not as a witness but as a warrior. "You saved this country," Trump told her quietly. "Not with a badge, not with a title, just with truth." Rachel broke down in tears. "I just wanted my daughter to live. I didn't know it would change the world." Trump smiled softly. "You reminded us why we fight." He then signed a special order right there in front of her. Emily Linwood's full treatment to be covered by a newly established whistleblower support fund. Rachel sobbed in disbelief. "I have no words. You already said them." Trump replied, "Years ago, when no one listened." That day, America didn't just see laws change. They saw a mother's cry turn into a nation's roar. And the man who gave her a voice, he wasn't just the 47th president. He became the chain breaker. Late Monday night, Trump received a folder marked "Finalized Recommendations, Boasberg Brothers." Inside was a copy of a rare executive deportation hold, not yet signed. Both James and David Boasberg were facing more than prison. They were now under investigation for foreign collusion, their international ties through offshore networks, and suspicious consular contacts triggered a provision that allowed them to be prepared for deportation pending trial. It was a move that stunned the legal world. Pam Bondi placed the documents on Trump's desk. "If you sign this hold," she said, "we keep them in the U.S. long enough to force full cooperation. If not, there's a risk they vanish into foreign protection." Trump picked up his pen. He looked out the window for a moment, rain streaking the glass just like it had when the week began. Then he signed it. They stay. Outside the courthouse, protesters and supporters gathered. Some were weeping, others were silent, but one thing was clear. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about right and wrong. And with a single stroke of a pen, Trump reminded the world, America never forgets, and it never backs down. Tuesday morning, a handwritten note slid across President Trump's desk. It came from Judge James Boasberg, now sitting in solitary under federal protection. The handwriting was shaky, but the message inside was clear. "Mr. President, before this ends, there is one more thing I must tell you. Something even my brother doesn't know. Years ago, I authorized a secret memorandum. It buried the original whistleblower complaint Rachel Linwood submitted. I did it under pressure, but also out of fear of what it would expose. That complaint, it named 5 sitting federal judges. I attached the names to this letter. I will testify if it means my son gets to grow up in a country that still believes in truth. Please don't give up on us. James Boasberg." Trump folded the note and stared into space. Rachel was called in again. When she read the names on the list, her knees buckled. One of them was a friend she had trusted. President Trump looked at her gently and said, "This is how corruption ends. Not with revenge, but with courage." And Rachel nodded through tears. By Tuesday afternoon, President Trump stood in front of the Supreme Court building, not to make a speech, not to call a press conference, but to walk through the very halls that had once turned a blind eye to corruption. Escorted by federal agents and security, he entered a private chamber where several high-level judges waited, all recently served notices of investigation. Among them were names from Boasberg's list. One judge stood up angrily. "This is unprecedented." Trump stared him down. "So was selling your conscience." He pulled out the letter, the one James wrote. He laid it on the table. "This is a mirror," Trump said, "and every one of you is going to look into it." The room fell dead silent. Outside, Rachel waited in the car with Jacob, who had recovered enough to smile again. He leaned on his mother and whispered, "You did it, Mom." Tears filled her eyes. "No, we did it." Inside, President Trump signed off on the largest judicial ethics investigation in U.S. history. It wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point. That evening, James Boasberg was granted one final request. Not freedom, not forgiveness, but a moment with his son. Inside a quiet visitor room, Jacob walked in slowly. There were no cameras, no court staff, just 2 chairs and a table between them. James stood up and couldn't hold back the tears. "I don't deserve this," he said. Jacob stepped closer. "No, you don't. But I came to tell you something anyway." James held his breath. "I forgive you," Jacob said. James's knees nearly buckled. "Why?" "Because I don't want to carry your guilt anymore," Jacob said. "I want to carry my future." He pulled something from his pocket, a photo of Emily Linwood. "She's doing better. Mom says she'll walk again one day." James smiled through tears. "She's alive." Jacob nodded. "Thanks to the man you once judged unfairly." James lowered his head, ashamed but grateful. And in that room, silent and heavy, something unexplainable happened. Not justice, not absolution, but healing. And outside that room, Trump waited with Rachel and Jacob. He put his hand on Jacob's shoulder and said, "Let's go home." Wednesday morning, President Trump stood at the Rose Garden podium, not for applause, not for a campaign, but for America. Flanked by Rachel Linwood, Jacob Boasberg, Pam Bondi, and a small photo of Emily in a frame, Trump addressed the nation. "This week we uncovered one of the most dangerous breaches of trust in our legal system," he began. "But we also uncovered something greater, the power of one voice, one mother, one boy, one truth." Rachel wiped her eyes as he continued. "Judge James Boasberg and his brother David will face a full and fair trial. They are under judicial hold and are being prepared for deportation as the law determines next steps. No one is above justice, not even a judge." He then turned to Jacob. "You reminded us what forgiveness looks like. You reminded us what family is." Trump raised his hand. "And today, I am signing the Linwood Act, a bill that protects whistleblowers and provides full medical care for children affected by government retaliation." The pen clicked. History was made. And as Trump hugged Rachel and Jacob, one single truth rang out across the country: real strength is standing for the voiceless. The video of the Rose Garden speech went viral within hours. Millions watched the replay on phones, TVs, and laptops, some at kitchen tables, others in hospital rooms. But one moment broke everyone. It was when Trump, holding Emily's photo, looked into the camera and said, "Emily, if you're watching, you are strong. You are brave and you are not forgotten. This nation loves you." Doctors at the Children's Hospital where Emily was recovering said she smiled when she heard it. It was the first full smile she'd shown in weeks. Rachel wept into her hands. Jacob, beside her, whispered, "He meant it." All across America, people who had lost faith in leadership began to believe again, not because of politics, but because of the humanity they saw in one man willing to confront corruption and heal its wounds. Even critics were stunned, silent. And in a single week, the 47th president did something no headline could twist. He united a divided nation around truth, compassion, and justice. That night, President Trump returned to the Oval Office for one final task. An envelope lay on his desk. No address, just a child's handwriting. It read, "Thank you, Mr. President. Love, Emily." Inside was a crayon drawing, a girl with a feeding tube standing beside a man in a blue suit under a big tree with the words, "Truth wins." Trump stared at it for a long time, his hand trembling just slightly. He placed it in a frame on his desk next to the Constitution. Then he turned to Pam Bondi and said, "Let's release the final video. Let the people see everything. No more secrets." And when that video dropped, showing the arrests, the tunnel, the confessions, the Rose Garden, millions wept, not because they were sad, but because they saw that truth still lives, even when it's been buried. They saw that a president didn't hide behind walls. He walked straight into the fire and pulled others out.